Today we are going to examine certain apparent contradictions in the field of nirvana. We know nirvana is associated with being egoless, desireless. Okay. But then we are used to function with ego and with desire. So this is what we are used to, and this is what the suggested highest state is. So what is the relationship between these two? Or asked differently, isn't desirelessness also a desire? And what is the role of ego in taking a person to this? So, is this a completely different direction compared to this normal way? These questions have bothered me so much, I would say for decades. Now I have answers. I found there is simply a different way of looking at things. I want to explain the link between pleasure and happiness. Happiness. Take pleasure and happiness. So what is the relationship? We take pleasure as something temporary. Very short term. And can be even impulsive. Can be impulsive. Can be addictive. Food, sex, praise. All positive things, but give a kick which is of short-term nature. That's pleasure. How do we look at happiness? Happiness is associated with something long-lasting. Long-lasting. Not temporary. And a sense of contentment. A sense of contentment. celebrating a New Year party is part of pleasure and not happiness. Health contributes to happiness. Addictions contribute to pleasure. Smoking is pleasure. Health is happiness. Okay. So, this distinction we can accept. Agreeable. But now, let us look at the connection between the pleasure and happiness. Pleasure is something anybody can pursue. A child can pursue pleasure. Eating a sweet gives pleasure. But then, problem with pleasure is that we want pleasures, but pleasures are linked to pain. If something is giving pleasure, not getting it gives pain. If smoking is pleasurable, not smoking gives pain when one becomes addictive. And pain is something negative, pleasure is something positive, and happiness is positive. Now, I want you to understand this. We don't want pain. We want pleasure. But if we are seeking only pleasure, then the pain is always a possibility. And so we may think, let us not get into this pain, let us move towards happiness. One should be very careful here. That is, our effort to minimize pain and maximizing pleasure is directing us to move away from pleasure, pain and towards happiness. That is, our plus and minus predispositions are driving towards a plus, that is happiness. To clarify further, if we don't know what is pain, we may not pursue happiness. We don't want pain, we want pleasure, and we find a sustained positive feeling which is closer to pleasure is happiness. That is to say, this plus and minus is driving us towards the plus. The pleasure of plus and the pain of minus is driving us towards plus. Which means pleasure only is driving us towards happiness. In that sense, pleasure and happiness are linked. Pleasure is driving us towards happiness. Through pleasure, we have the sensation of the positive thing. We want more of it, and we think more of it is possible only when we behave in certain ways, and so we move towards happiness. So, pleasure and happiness are not two things in two different directions. It is like an intelligent pursuit of pleasure, working out what may give pain, may land us towards happiness. So what is the role of desire? Yes, desire for pleasure is leading to desire for happiness, and finally towards happiness. And what is the role of ego? Ego is trying to be happy. It is ego that is driving the pleasure towards happiness. Okay. Which means happiness and pleasure are linked. And one more thing I can tell you here is that pleasure drives happiness. This is true. But once a person knows what is happiness and how it is different from pleasure, then he will look at pleasure from happiness point of view. Then he will be less vulnerable to pleasure. He will say, okay, that gives some short-term kick and I won't be interested. Okay. Happiness is of long term. Like, oh, I suffered and out of suffering I became better. That is happiness. I worked hard and I achieved this. I am proud of my achievement. Happiness. I want to go to movie now. That is pleasure. But I don't yield to this temptation. I will do what I want to do in my life. That is happiness. And if one knows happiness, one becomes less vulnerable to pleasure. Okay. So this is the connection between pleasure and happiness. But why are we doing this? I want to say the connection between something beyond happiness and happiness is similar to the connection between happiness and pleasure. Pleasure, happiness. Introduce a new word, bliss. We said pleasure guides happiness, and happiness frees a person from strong predisposition to pleasure. This is guiding. This is freeing. One who has seen happiness looks at pleasure from higher point of view. Now come to happiness and bliss. Happiness is long-term nature, but it is ego-related. I worked hard and I made it. I is there. I suffered and survived. I is there. Achieved. I is there. Myself realized. I is there. So self-realization is also related to happiness. Whereas bliss is no self at all. No ego at all. Now, connection between happiness and bliss. It is like this. Happiness being ego dependent, there are always cases that when you fail to do what you want to do, you will be unhappy. Happiness being ego dependent has its opposite, unhappiness. You lived your life in a way you didn't want to live. Okay. And after closer examination, you will see that if you don't want unhappiness, if you want something similar to happiness but without the possibility of unhappiness, then you will see that egoistic actions have plus minus possibilities, whereas non-egoistic actions don't have, and that is apparently bliss. Can a football in a football court be calm? Can stay at a place? No. It is hit by different players in different directions. Sometimes it reaches its goal, sometimes it doesn't. But it is constantly being hit. It may be happy when it reaches a goal, unhappy when it misses. Ego appears to be more like that, whether it is pleasure related or happiness related. If we realize higher goals over a long period of time, we tend to be happy, and if we don't realize, we will be unhappy. But they are related to ego only. So if one is seeing something which is not affected by idea of this achievement or that achievement, respect or disrespect, good or bad, maybe such a thing can be called bliss. One may expect that I can say more on bliss, or I will say how to be in bliss. No, I am not going to do that. My point here is different. My point is that it is ego guiding. It is desire guiding from pleasure to happiness and happiness to bliss. Because this is all pursuit of the plus. And wanting plus is desire. The motive to implement the plus is being done by ego. So, this is similar to something like you want to go to marriage and you have joined a marriage party, hired a bus, and you are going. Marriage is taking place many kilometers away. So, by bus you are going and you reach the town. Maybe you reach closer to marriage hall. But then, will you watch marriage from the bus? No. You will get down. You walk and then see the marriage. It means on a bus you are coming so close, and then here you are getting down and then go to marriage. I would say all this is ego. Last stage, egolessness. All this is desire. The last stage, desirelessness. So, the villains of Indian spirituality, the devils, if you understand them well, are what are taking you, or those that are taking you to this God or bliss, whatever. So it means ego and egoless are not in two different directions. After going with ego covering sufficient distance, then you realize that for something similar to happiness, but without the possibility of unhappiness, ego is a hindrance like this. So, it is ego that is directing you to egolessness. It is desire that is directing you to desirelessness. These are not contradictions. So, egolessness is as biological as ego. Desirelessness is as biological as desire. It is simply examining yourself closely and pursuing higher, more stable, more permanent forms of feeling a state of well-being. So, the things that appear to be contradictory, they are not contradictory. You go by bus, but finally to walk. It is not bus versus walking. And then bus, walking, and I think if there is a problem here, you come back to bus. Threatened, desire will be ignited in you, ego will be ignited in you, and come back to your egoistic state, to your desire state. You saw a snake suddenly, desire is ignited, fear is ignited, egoism is ignited, and you run, you save yourself. So what is important is to know that desire is not the only thing, ego is not the only thing. And if ego and desire are pursued with more dedication, with more intelligence, you come across an understanding that a higher state is somewhat different, and they are some kind of freedom from ego and desire, the very fuels that took you to that point. Okay. We will examine one more implication of this. There is one statement made by Krishnamurti which is very popular. Truth is a pathless land. Truth is a pathless land. What is meant by being pathless? When most people are saying truth is finally about being egoless or being desireless, then how is that a pathless land? What is the connection? My impression is that even if the truth is at one place, and even if there is a road like this, it may be pathless because you may be here. How do you go from this place to this? If you go till this, then there may be a way, but otherwise, how do you go? But this is an analogy. What am I referring to is, a person has distinct ways of understanding things, a distinct belief system, a way of understanding, a way of thinking, questioning. He has his own set of concepts. And pursuing truth means he has to learn it in his own way, through his questions, through the answers he gets to his questions. And only then it makes sense to him. Why I am saying this is that The questions that I discussed today are the questions that bothered me so much. But it is not necessary that they are bothering everyone. What is important is that they should try to answer or get answers to their own questions. They should have questions and they should try to resolve questions. But the questions should be theirs. And so when I raised these questions of desire and ego and contrasted with nirvana and asked how can a person work without desire, without ego, it generated so many questions in me. And seeing so much of progress made on the basis of ego, desire, the capitalism, I understood that there is something wrong. So there was an explosion of questions at one point of time. And now strangely, I am seeing a kind of explosion of answers. Because many questions that tied me, that conditioned me, were answered. So, this is a different kind of feeling and about which I am shocked. So, that is why one should pursue one's own way. Okay. That observer is the observed meant so much to Krishnamurti, but it doesn't have to be to everyone. Who am I meant so much to Ramana Maharshi. But that may not be the only way of raising a fundamental question for everybody. So one has to negotiate one's own path through a jungle, even if there is a road somewhere to the truth. This is what I understood. Thank you.